Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. First of all, a tour de force. Nigeria continues to raise the bar for the continent's powerlifters. We speak to Esther Nworgu, who's bagged silver at the Paris Games on Wednesday. And as global competition to cozy up to resource-rich Africa heats up, dozens of leaders from the continent heads to China for a high-stakes summit. Beijing is Africa's top trading partner, and infrastructure deals are being signed off already. But it's certainly not business as usual. Some aspects of cooperation have to be redefined, and many states are hoping to thrash out big shifts on debt still owed to the Asian giant. And across the board, Africa is hoping to address a glaring trade imbalance. But first, Nigerian powerlifters have been a powerful presence at the Paralympics. And that success became even weightier on Wednesday as Esther Nworgu claimed silver at the Paris Games. It was an emotional one. The 21-year-old only missed out on gold in the up to 41K bench press by 1 kilo. And Nworgu's performance is even more impressive because it came just a couple of days after she dislocated her shoulder, meaning she pretty much pushed through with one arm out of action. She says claiming the silver was still like heaven. Our James Vazina was there as she medalled and caught up with her shortly after her medaling.
Well, we've just witnessed an incredible competition in the women's 41 kilos, a competition in which Nigeria's Esther Nworgu managed to take this shiny silver medal. Esther, how was that? You looked so happy on the podium. You almost looked as though you'd won gold.
Sure, exactly, because this silver medal, to me, it's a gold medal. My last attempt, to me, is a world record.
And in the end, you've set a Paralympic record. It didn't last for too long because, of course, China managed to break it just after that. But it was full of emotion in these finals.
Sure, yes, because I never expected any medal from here because I made an injury 2 days ago, and the doctors confirmed that I cannot make it, and they want me never to come here to compete. But something in me kept telling me, that's a spirit of sportsmanship, keep telling me, you can do this. You've gone so far for you to stay back. You can do it. You can compete, and you will win.
And in the end, so you ignored the doctor's advice, but went on to win Nigeria's first silver medal in these games.
Yes, because sometimes when your spirit tells you, you can do this, you need to follow it.
What's it like in Nigeria for parasports? What is it like training back home?
Nigeria, I think, when it comes to powerlifting, Nigeria is the best because we take powerlifting as our occupation, and then we focus on it. Medal to Nigerians are very much important.
And what do you think can still be done for athletes, of course, with disabilities who want to get into sports in Nigeria? Is access easy? What else should be done?
It's not actually easy because accessibility is the key factor. That's the one thing we lack from Nigeria. Yes.
You're still so young. What's next?
Next, powerlifting, gold medal, and world records.
Well, a lot expected there. Nigeria, of course, who are second in the history of the medals tally in powerlifting. There'll be plenty more powerlifting coming up throughout the week. Thank you, Esther, for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you so much.
Good luck with the rest.
I am properly jealous. Esther Nworgu there, both adorable and inspirational with our James Vazina. We turn to China, which itself is hosting a raft of African heavyweights itself this week. A China-Africa summit kicked off on Wednesday. China is the continent's top bilateral lender, and many of the heads of state in Beijing are hoping to nurture a relationship upon which many have relied for the creation of huge infrastructure projects in Africa over the years, even if the figures have been lower as China feels its own domestic financial pressures. Our Yenna Lee was at the opening of the summit.
Beijing has been touting the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation as the biggest international event it has hosted in several years. Indeed, 24 African heads of state are here and have had face-to-face meetings with President Xi Jinping. And though everybody has their own bilateral relationship with China, there are some continent-wide concerns, mainly linked to Africa's $64 billion trade deficit with the Asian giant. Delegations from the continent are also here to attract more Chinese investment. China, meanwhile, is looking to import minerals, export green technology, whilst promoting its vision for the world. You can expect to hear the phrase South-South cooperation throughout the week, as Beijing tries to emphasize that trade with them is not quite like trading with other big players. And like at the last summit, we can see that big infrastructure projects are no longer being talked about loudly and proudly. Now, Beijing prefers to promote what it calls small and beautiful projects. That said, on the sidelines of the forum, China, Tanzania and Zambia have already signed an initial deal to refurbish an old railway line connecting the two East African nations. Almost every country from the continent has sent a delegation here to China, except Eswatini, that didn't get an invite due to its diplomatic ties with Taiwan. Now, ahead of the summit, I actually sat down with a Chinese importer of Kenyan flowers to ask her about the impact of new fast-track customs policies on her business. Huang Jinan first visited a Kenyan flower farm in 2018. Impressed by the quality of the blooms, she later started an import business back home.
This yellow rose is my favorite. It's also quite popular.
On average, she sells 100,000 stems a month, mostly wholesale, to major cities around China.
They're larger than my fist and they have a strong scent.
Her business got a recent boost from a Beijing policy change that slashed red tape for African agricultural and horticultural imports.
We have access to the green lanes for customs clearance. It only takes 17 hours for the flowers to get here from Kenya.
The Green Lane policy was launched in 2021 here in Hunan province. 16 new African products have since entered the Chinese market, compared to 11 products over the previous 2 decades. But the measures only go so far. The trade deficit between Africa and its largest trading partner keeps growing. Some economists say the imbalance can only be tackled if the continent diversifies its economies to produce more value-added goods.
This is something that is a Pan-African collective position that we want to move away from the trade of raw commodities. So to give a very simple example, instead of just exporting cocoa beans, we also want to be exporting chocolate.
Another battle for African exporters is for Beijing to recognize products unique to their place of origin.
So similar to how Italian prosciutto is protected by geographical indications, we have teas such as South Africa's rooibos tea, which can only be produced in South Africa. Presently, these are not protected.
The trade between the two reached a record $282 billion in 2023. Africa's trade deficit with China increased almost 37% in 1 year.
Yana Li there for us in Beijing. Now, trade relations between China and Africa are evolving, but Beijing's debt diplomacy has come in for criticism. But even if some African countries are hoping to reboot certain aspects of the relationship, they can't yet afford to turn their back on it altogether. Esther Nworgu brings us more from Kenya's capital, Nairobi.
For more than 20 years, Kenya has been borrowing a lot of money to invest on huge infrastructure projects that several governments believed will help develop the country and will help bring more money in Kenya. But now the country is heavily indebted. Kenya's debt represents 70% of its GDP. And when it comes to borrowing, China is a key partner. Beijing owns more than 20% of Kenya's debt. It's more than 6 billion euros. Usually, China lends money to Kenya when it comes to huge infrastructure projects where it can send its own companies. It was the case for the highway between Mombasa and Nairobi. It was the case for Nairobi's highway. And every time we can see China's mark on this project. We can see many Chinese workers walking around. And also the architecture is not Kenyan, it's a Chinese one. It's a case for Nairobi's highway. Every entrance and exit on this highway are traditional Chinese houses. So many here wonder if it's a good idea to rely that much on Chinese money. Last year, Kenya had to repay a 1 billion euros loan to China. And so many Kenyans are wondering if it's a good idea to use taxpayers' money to repay that debt instead of investing directly that money in Kenya to improve the life of Kenyans.
Bastien Aronmi there for us. And finally, farmers in Ghana are dreading the impact this year's delayed rains could have on food prices next year. After the driest spell the country's seen in 4 decades, Accra is trying to get ahead of the expected pressure and has banned the export of grains like rice, corn and soya beans. Justice Baidu brings us more.
Close to 1 million farmers are estimated to have been affected by this drought, costing the country around 600 million euros in lost revenue. In 8 out of Ghana's 16 regions, farmland still look withered, with the major farming season now drawing to a close.
That whole part of the northern of the country constitutes over 60% of our grain production in the country. So you can imagine that, and we depend largely on grain. Maize is a staple food, rice, soya, and all that. Everywhere we eat it. So if you have a shortfall in such area, then you can see that the country is on its way to facing a serious food crisis. If they have taken loans from the banks, and because you just say that you're banned, then it means you are suppressing prices. It is good for consumers, but then it's also bad for producers.
The government is hoping that this new ban on the export of cereals would put a check on market prices and also ensure availability of food, especially to feed the country's livestock industry.
There's really not much grains in the system anyway. Okay, so the little that we have, let's protect it for the benefit of Ghanaians. And we are not saying that if you're a farmer and you have grains, now you don't have anywhere to sell it, come and sell it to government for cheap.
Ghana is currently under a 3-year IMF bailout following the collapse in the value of the cedi, its national currency, with an attendant high cost of living.
That breakdown from our Justice Baidu in Accra. And that's where we're going to have to leave it for now. Thanks for joining us for Eye on Africa. Do so again if you can. Till then, take care.